Part 1. The Gallery of Souls. The Metropolitan Museum of Ancient Art stood silent in the pre-dawn darkness of Prague, its Gothic spires piercing the winter sky like accusations. Inside, among priceless artifacts spanning 3 millennia, Viktor Moravec moved through shadows that seemed to embrace him like old friends. He was not a security guard, though he wore their uniform. He was not a thief, though he moved with practiced stealth. He was the museum's night curator, a position that had never officially existed, yet had been filled continuously for the past 400 years. Always by the same person. Viktor paused before a Sumerian tablet, circa 2100 BCE, his fingers hovering millimeters from its surface without touching. The security cameras would show nothing. He'd learned long ago how to avoid their mechanical gaze, moving in the blind spots, existing in the spaces between recorded moments. The tablet told a story of blood and gods and the price of immortality. Viktor had been there when it was carved. Not in Sumer, he wasn't quite that old, but he'd met the scribe who'd created it. Centuries later, when the man was ancient and dying and desperate to pass on knowledge that no one else would preserve. That was Viktor's purpose. Not to feed, though he did that too. Not to kill, though he had when necessary, but to remember. To preserve. To curate the knowledge and art that humanity created and then forgot. He was a vampire, yes. But more importantly, he was a keeper of memory in a world that seemed determined to forget everything that mattered. The museum had been built around his collection, though no one living knew that. Donors thought they were contributing to an institution founded in 1823. Boards of directors came and went, each generation believing they were continuing someone else's work. Only Viktor knew that the entire museum existed as a front for his real collection, the one hidden in subterranean levels that no blueprint recorded, in chambers sealed by methods modern engineering couldn't explain. Down there, in the true collection, were things the world had forgotten, things it wasn't ready to remember. Things that would rewrite history if they were ever revealed. Viktor descended now through a passage hidden behind a medieval tapestry. The stairs spiraled down, past the museum's basement, past the city's sewer system, past even the ancient crypts that predated Prague itself. The walls transitioned from modern concrete to medieval stone to Roman brick to something older that predated classification. At the bottom, a door of black iron inscribed with symbols and languages that had died before Sanskrit was born. Viktor placed his palm against the cold metal. The symbols flared with pale blue light, not electricity, but something older, something that recognized the blood of its creator. The door opened soundlessly. Beyond lay the true museum of ancient art, not the sanitized collection upstairs for tourists and scholars, but the real archive of human achievement and horror. The first chamber contained books. Not just any books originals that history claimed were lost. The complete library of Alexandria, rescued book by book over decades before the final burning. Mayan codices that conquistadors supposedly destroyed. Chinese philosophical texts that Emperor Qin Shi Huang allegedly buried. Islamic scientific treatises erased during the Mongol invasions. Viktor had saved them all. Sometimes by theft, sometimes by purchase, sometimes by being present at the moment of destruction and spiriting away what he could carry. He moved past the library into the gallery of artifacts. Here stood objects that would revolutionize understanding of human history, proof that the Bronze Age collapse was caused by factors historians hadn't yet discovered, evidence of technologies that predated accepted timelines, artifacts suggesting contact between civilizations that supposedly never met. But Viktor kept them hidden, not from malice, but from experience. He'd tried sharing such knowledge before. In 1347, he'd shown scholars proof that disease spread through invisible particles, not divine punishment or bad air. They'd called him a heretic. In 1633, he'd offered evidence supporting Galileo's heliocentric model. The Inquisition had nearly caught him. The world, Viktor had learned, only accepted truth at its own pace. Present evidence too early, and they destroy both the evidence and the presenter. So he waited, preserved, curated, and occasionally, very carefully, allowed certain discoveries to happen when humanity was ready. Tonight, he had a new acquisition to catalog. In the center of the artifact chamber sat a wooden crate, recently delivered through channels that involved 7 intermediaries, none of whom knew the others existed. Inside, wrapped in silk that had once belonged to a Chinese empress, was a golden mask. Not just any mask. The death mask of Akhenaten, the pharaoh who'd tried to revolutionize Egyptian religion toward monotheism. History claimed his death mask had never been found. History was wrong. Viktor lifted it carefully. Even through gloves, he could feel the power resonating from the ancient gold. Not supernatural power. Viktor didn't believe in magic, even as a vampire, but the weight of history, of human ambition and faith, and the desperate desire to be remembered. He carried it to an empty pedestal, removed the gloves, and placed his bare hands on the mask's surface. Information flooded his vampire senses. Not psychic vision, he wasn't that kind of undead, but the accumulated traces that time left on objects. Skin oils, ancient tears, traces of ritual unguents. To his enhanced perception, they told stories more reliable than written records. He saw Akhenaten's face, not beautiful as propaganda depicted, but worn by stress and conviction. He saw the pharaoh's genuine belief in his sun god, his willingness to destabilize an empire for theological principle. He saw the mask's creation, the craftsman working in secret, hiding it from priests who'd want it destroyed after Akhenaten's death. And he saw how it had survived 3,000 years, passed between collectors who never quite understood what they possessed. Until now. Viktor opened his journal, handwritten in a shorthand he'd developed over centuries, combining elements of extinct languages into something no living scholar could decipher. He recorded everything: provenance, condition, historical context, and most importantly, what the artifact revealed that written history had missed. Akhenaten hadn't just promoted monotheism. He'd been trying to preserve knowledge. Knowledge of something older, something the priesthood wanted suppressed. Viktor could sense it in the mask's decoration, in symbols that appeared decorative but carried meaning. A mystery. One of thousands Viktor had encountered over centuries. Most would never be solved. Time had destroyed too much evidence. But he documented them anyway, preserving the questions even when answers were impossible. He worked through the night, as he always did, cataloging, preserving, remembering. When dawn approached, he ascended back through the hidden passage, emerged in the museum proper, and walked past security cameras that would show only empty hallways. At his apartment, a modest space filled with books and very little else, he drew the blackout curtains and prepared for the day's sleep. But first, as he did every morning, he opened his true journal. Not the cataloging notes, but his personal record. Entry 47,329. Another night of preservation. Another artifact saved from destruction or obscurity. Another small victory against humanity's tendency toward forgetting. Sometimes Viktor wondered if his work mattered. In 400 years, he'd saved countless treasures, preserved incalculable knowledge. But the world continued making the same mistakes, fighting the same wars, forgetting the same lessons. Perhaps, he thought as sleep took him, that was precisely why the work mattered. Because humans forgot, there had to be someone who remembered, even if that someone was no longer quite human themselves. Viktor woke at sunset to find an email waiting. Unusual, he maintained minimal digital presence, preferring the anonymity of pre-internet existence. Only a handful of contacts had this address, all of them antique dealers or black market antiquities traders who knew him as a wealthy, eccentric collector. The message was from Yuki Tanaka, a dealer in Tokyo who specialized in items from the Edo period and earlier. They'd worked together for 30 years, a significant relationship by human standards, barely a blink for Viktor. V. Found something that matches your interests. Not for sale publicly. Too dangerous. You'll understand when you see it. Can you come to Tokyo? Joai dangerous was a word Yuki didn't use lightly. In their 3 decades of collaboration, she'd used it exactly twice. Both times, the artifacts in question had been worth the journey. Viktor booked a flight under one of his many passports, this one claiming he was Viktor Moravec, antiquities consultant from Vienna. The identity was thoroughly documented, aged appropriately, would survive any background check. He'd learned to maintain multiple identities, cycling through them every few decades before people noticed he never aged. The flight to Tokyo departed at midnight. Viktor traveled first class not for comfort, but for privacy. The curtained pod meant fewer witnesses to his nocturnal habits. He didn't sleep on planes, didn't eat the offered meals, only stared out the window at the darkness punctuated by distant city lights. Each light represented hundreds or thousands of humans living their brief lives. Creating, destroying, loving, hating, building, forgetting. Viktor had watched cities rise and fall, had seen empires bloom and wither, had cataloged the archaeological remains of civilizations that most people never knew existed. Sometimes the weight of all that memory felt crushing. Other times, it felt like the only thing tethering him to meaning in an existence that could otherwise stretch into pointless eternity. The plane landed in Tokyo at dawn. Viktor endured the discomfort of early morning light long enough to clear customs and reach his hotel, another, carefully chosen refuge with blackout curtains and privacy. He slept through the day, dreaming of ancient things and the people who'd created them. Yuki's shop was in Akihabara, hidden among the electronic stores and anime cafes, an intentional camouflage. Tourists looking for manga wouldn't notice a small antique shop. The serious collectors knew where to find her. Viktor arrived after sunset, dressed in a conservative suit that suggested money without ostentation. The shop appeared closed, but the door opened to his knock. Yuki was 57 now, her hair going silver in elegant streaks. Viktor remembered when she'd been 27, just starting in the antiquities trade, sharp and hungry and willing to work with a strange European who asked odd questions and paid in cash. She'd aged. He hadn't. It was becoming noticeable. Soon, he'd need to end this professional relationship. Stage a death for Viktor Moravec, wait a decade, return as someone else. The thought saddened him. Yuki was one of the few people he'd worked with long enough to almost call a friend. But that was the price of immortality. Everyone else moved through time while you remained static. Novak-san, Yuki greeted him with a slight bow. Thank you for coming so quickly. Your message suggested urgency, more than you know. She locked the door behind him, flipped the sign to closed. What I'm about to show you. I debated even contacting you. But if anyone should preserve this, it's you. She led him to the back room, through another door, downstairs into a basement that smelled of old paper and older secrets. In the center of a clear workspace sat a box of plain wood, modern and unremarkable. Yuki opened it with careful hands. Inside, nestled in acid-free tissue, was a book. Not particularly old by Viktor's standards, maybe 400 years, early Edo period. But the moment he saw it, he understood Yuki's concern. The cover bore symbols he recognized. Not Japanese, older, much older, Sumerian. This shouldn't exist, Viktor breathed. No, it shouldn't. Yuki stepped back, giving him space. According to everything we know about history, the Sumerian language was dead thousands of years before Japan's written language even developed. Yet this book, created in early 1600s Japan, contains extensive Sumerian text alongside Japanese annotations. Viktor's mind raced through possibilities. Forgery? No, his senses detected genuine age. Coincidental similarity? Impossible. The Sumerian was too accurate, too specific. That left only one explanation. Someone in early Edo Japan had known Sumerian, had preserved knowledge that the rest of the world believed lost. With trembling hands unusual for him, vampires didn't usually tremble. Viktor lifted the book. His enhanced senses absorbed information. The paper's composition, the ink's formula, traces of who had handled it, and the content. Gods, the content. It was a translation manual, Sumerian to Japanese, but more than that, it included historical context that modern scholars didn't know. Details about Sumerian religion, science, mathematics that had supposedly been lost when cuneiform tablets were destroyed or buried. Someone had preserved this knowledge, carried it across millennia and continents, passed it down through generations until it reached Japan and was finally recorded in this book. How did you acquire this? Viktor asked. Estate sale, old samurai family, lineage dying out. Most of their collection was standard swords, armor, calligraphy. This was in a hidden compartment in a desk. I don't think the family even knew it existed. Yuki paused. I've shown it to no one else. Haven't photographed it, haven't told any other dealers. Because Viktor, I know what you really are. The world stopped. Viktor turned slowly. Yuki stood by the door, not threatening, not afraid. Just stating a fact. How long have you known? His voice was calm, but his mind calculated escape routes, evaluated whether he'd need to use compulsion, whether this friendship was about to end in blood and forgetting. Since the beginning. My grandmother was an Anmi Ojiya practitioner of old Japanese magic. She taught me to see things others miss. When we first met 30 years ago, I saw that you cast no shadow in certain lights. That your reflection in old mirrors was wrong. That you never touched silver if you could avoid it. And you said nothing. Why would I? You've been respectful, honorable, paid fairly. You preserve things that matter. What do I care if you drink blood? Yuki smiled slightly. Besides, my grandmother told me stories about the immortals who guard knowledge, who remember what humanity forgets. She said they were necessary. That without them, we'd lose ourselves completely to time. Viktor didn't know how to respond. In 400 years, only a handful of humans had discovered his nature. Most had died, either by his hand in self-defense or by the hand of vampire hunters who didn't share Yuki's tolerance. This book, Yuki continued, is part of a collection. The family kept records cryptic, but clear enough. There are more volumes. Different languages, different eras, all preserving knowledge that official history claims is lost. Where? Scattered. The samurai family was part of a network. During the Tokugawa shogunate, certain families were tasked with preserving forbidden knowledge. When the Meiji Restoration happened and Japan opened to the West, the network disbanded. The volumes were hidden separately to protect them. Do you have locations? Some. Enough to start searching. Yuki pulled out a notebook paper, not digital smart woman. But Viktor, there's a complication. I'm not the only one who knows about this network. There's a collector in Shanghai who's been asking questions, offering large sums for information. And his reputation, tell me, they say he doesn't collect to preserve. He collects to destroy. Specifically, he targets items that contradict certain historical narratives. Anything suggesting ancient knowledge was more advanced than accepted. Anything implying lost civilizations. He finds these artifacts and erases them. A destroyer of knowledge. In Viktor's long existence, he'd encountered many such people. Fanatics who believed some knowledge was too dangerous. Ideologues who wanted history to fit their narratives. Pragmatists who profited from maintaining certain lies. He hated them all with a purity that his vampire nature made absolute. I need to find these volumes before he does. I thought you'd say that. Yuki handed him the notebook. Locations I've identified. It's not complete, but it's a start. And Viktor? Be careful. This collector, he has resources. Money, connections. And from what I hear, he's not entirely human either. Of course not. The most dangerous destroyers never were. Viktor spent the night studying the Sumerian Japanese book, photographing every page with a camera designed for archival work. By dawn, he had a complete digital backup stored across multiple encrypted servers. The original he left with Yuki, locked in a vault that had protections both modern and traditional. Back at his hotel, he examined the notebook. 7 locations across Asia. 3 in Japan, 2 in Korea, 1 in Mongolia, 1 in Myanmar. Each location was cryptic, a temple name here, coordinates there, a family surname in another entry. This would take time. Months, possibly years to track down every volume. And all the while, his competitor would be searching too. Viktor felt something he hadn't experienced in decades: urgency. His work had always been patient, methodical. Centuries meant nothing to an immortal. But knowing someone was actively destroying what he sought to preserve lit a fire in his long cold blood. He began planning his search, prioritizing locations by accessibility and risk of discovery. Japan, first 3 volumes potentially hidden there. Then Korea. The others could wait. But first, he needed information about his competitor. Who was this destroyer? What motivated him? And most importantly, what was he? Viktor had connections throughout the antiquities world. Time to use them. He sent coded messages through encrypted channels to dealers, collectors, and scholars he'd worked with over the decades. Asking about a collector in Shanghai, interested in forbidden knowledge, possibly not human. The responses came slowly, carefully. No one wanted to speak openly about such matters. But piece by piece, a picture emerged. The collector called himself Mr. Chun. No first name, or if he had one, he never used it. Operating from Shanghai, but with agents throughout Asia and beyond. Immensely wealthy, source unknown. Collected aggressively, paid exorbitantly, never showed his acquisitions publicly. And the rumors that he was old, impossibly old. That he'd been operating under different names for centuries. That he had unnatural abilities to find hidden things, as if he could sense them. Another vampire then. Or something similar. Viktor had encountered other vampires before. Most were solitary, territorial, avoiding each other to minimize risks. Some were allies in preservation. He'd worked with a vampire, antiquarian in Cairo for decades, until she'd been destroyed by hunters. Others were enemies, viewing the past as something to plunder rather than protect. If Mr. Chun was actively destroying knowledge, they would be enemies. The question was whether they'd have to be mortal ones. The first volume in Japan was supposedly hidden in a temple near Kyoto. Not a famous temple, those were too public, too preserved, too watched. This was a small neighborhood temple, slowly falling into disrepair as its congregation aged and young people moved away. Viktor arrived on a rainy evening, dressed in the plain clothes of a wandering pilgrim. The monk who greeted him was elderly, suspicious of strangers, but bound by hospitality. "I'm researching my family history," Viktor explained in careful Japanese. "I believe ancestors of mine may have had connection to this temple in the Edo period." The monk's suspicion didn't fade, but he allowed Viktor inside, out of the rain. The temple was small, humble, clearly struggling financially. Paint peeled, wood showed rot. The Buddha statue needed restoration that no one could afford. "What family name?" the monk asked. Viktor provided a name from Yuki's research, a samurai family that had been patrons of this temple 300 years ago. All dead now, lineage ended. The monk's eyes widened slightly. Recognition. That family, yes. They were generous patrons, until he trailed off. Until they weren't. One day they simply stopped coming, stopped their donations. We assumed they'd fallen into disfavor or poverty. We never learned the truth. I'm trying to uncover what happened. Family records suggest they left something here. Something important to them. The monk studied Viktor with ancient eyes. Humans who lived long enough developed a kind of wisdom that age granted. This monk had it, the ability to see beyond surfaces. "You're not really researching family history." "No," Viktor admitted. Lying to such people was useless and disrespectful. "I'm searching for knowledge that was hidden. Knowledge this family helped preserve. I want to continue their work. And if I've already given it to someone else." Another man came 2 months ago, also searching, also claiming noble purpose. Viktor's dead heart sank. "Did you give it to him?" "No, I didn't trust him." His eyes were, the monk struggled for words, empty. Like he saw objects where he should have seen meaning. "You're different. Your eyes are sad, burdened. Those are the eyes of someone who cares too much, not too little. Where is it? The monk led him through the temple, past the main hall, to a storage building that was more decrepit than the rest. Inside, among dusty boxes and forgotten furniture, he opened a floor panel. Below was a space sealed with paper prayers written in ancient script. The monk broke the seals without ceremony. Whatever protection they'd once held had faded with the faith of those who created them. Inside the hidden space, another book, similar to the one in Tokyo, but older. The cover was Korean, the text inside a mixture of Mongolian and something Viktor couldn't immediately identify. He photographed everything before even opening it properly. Then, with infinite care, he began to read. It was a continuation. The Japanese book had been Sumerian to Japanese. This was earlier in the chain, something to Mongolian to Korean. Piece by piece, the network of preservation revealing itself. But more than that. These weren't just translations. They were commentaries, interpretations, additions from each generation of preservers. The knowledge wasn't static, it was living, growing, being reinterpreted by each culture that maintained it. This is extraordinary, Viktor whispered. What does it say? The monk asked. It's a record of human knowledge stretching back thousands of years. Science, philosophy, religion, all preserved by people who believed it was too important to let die. And the other man? What did he want? To destroy it. To erase knowledge he considers dangerous or inconvenient. Viktor looked at the monk. I need to take this. Keep it safe. Continue the preservation. But I'll compensate the temple, generously. The monk laughed, a dry, rustling sound. What use does this temple have for money? We're dying. Another decade, and there won't be anyone left to tend this place. Better the book goes to someone who values it. He paused. Though I would like proof that you're truly preserving, not destroying. Viktor pulled out his phone, called up his secure server, showed the monk his digital archives. Thousands of items, meticulously documented, all preserved not just physically, but in multiple backups across the globe. The monk nodded slowly. Very well, take it. Continue the work, but promise me something. What? If you find the whole collection, if you discover what all these books together reveal, share it. When the world is ready. Don't hoard it forever like the families did. Knowledge that's never shared might as well be destroyed. It was a fair demand. Viktor made the promise, knowing he might not keep it. The world had proven repeatedly it wasn't ready for certain truths. But the monk had earned the courtesy of the lie. Viktor left the temple with the book secured in a protective case. Rain continued falling, washing the streets of Kyoto clean. Somewhere in this city, Mr. Chun's agents were likely searching for the same treasures. Viktor needed to move faster. The next 2 Japanese locations yielded similar results. One book gone, likely taken by Chun's people. Another still hidden, retrieved by Viktor before his competitor arrived. He was building a collection within a collection. The books together told a story no modern historian knew, that ancient knowledge had been preserved through secret networks, passed between cultures, maintained by dedicated guardians who believed some truths transcended empires and eras. But they also revealed something darker. The knowledge being preserved wasn't just academic. Mixed with the history and science were warnings about something the ancient civilizations had encountered, something they'd failed to stop or understand, something their descendants needed to be prepared for. Viktor couldn't tell if it was metaphor or literal truth. The texts were fragmentary, poetic, possibly corrupted by translation. But the pattern repeated across cultures, a warning about something from beyond, something that had come before and would come again. It read like mythology. But Viktor had learned that mythology was often history in disguise. He needed the rest of the volumes, needed to see the complete picture before passing judgment. The Korean locations were harder to access. One was in the DMZ, the demilitarized zone between North and South Korea, hidden in an abandoned village that neither side claimed. Reaching it would require bribing guards, risking detection, possibly dealing with unexploded mines. Viktor went anyway. The village was a ghost town, frozen in 1953 when the armistice was signed. Nature had reclaimed most of it, trees growing through roofs, vines swallowing walls. The book was supposedly in a well, sealed in a waterproof container. Finding the right well took hours. Testing each one, looking for signs of disturbance or preservation. Finally, in a well that still held water despite decades of abandonment, Viktor found a metal cylinder anchored to the wall 3 meters down. He descended without equipment. Vampire strength and healing meant he could simply jump down, retrieve the cylinder, and climb back up using handholds he carved into the stone with his bare hands. The cylinder was sealed with wax and prayers. Inside, another book, this one in classical Chinese with annotations in Sanskrit. The chain reached India now. Viktor photographed everything by the light of his phone, stored the original in his protective case, and climbed out. He was halfway back to the extraction point when he encountered the other vampire. She stood in the middle of the abandoned village street, utterly still, perfectly visible in the moonlight. Asian features, ageless beauty, dressed in modern tactical gear that suggested she was more soldier than scholar. "You must be Viktor Moravec," she said in Mandarin. "The curator, and you work for Mr. Chun." "I am Mr. Chun." She smiled without warmth. "Did you think I'd send agents to do my own hunting?" "These books are too important to trust to others," Viktor reassessed. The collector was a woman, not a man. The masculine name and pronoun was misdirection. Smart, it had thrown off his research. "You've been destroying knowledge," he said. "Destroying?" "No, protecting. There's a difference." Chun walked closer, movements fluid as water. She was older than him, he realized, much older. The kind of vampire that accrued power through centuries. Protecting by erasing? Protecting by controlling. "This knowledge you're collecting, do you even know what it reveals? What it warns against?" Chun gestured at the book in his case. "You're gathering pieces of a puzzle without understanding the complete picture. And when you finally see it, you'll wish you'd let me destroy these fragments. Then tell me, what's the picture? The end of everything." Not metaphorically, literally. The ancient civilizations that created this network weren't preserving knowledge. They were creating a warning system. An alert for when it returns. When what returns? I don't know. That's the problem. The texts are incomplete, fragmentary. But they all agree on one thing. Something came in the distant past. Destroyed advanced civilizations we don't even have names for. The survivors scattered, started over, and created these preservation networks to warn future generations. Viktor processed this. "And you want to destroy the warning?" "I want to destroy the beacon. Because here's what you haven't realized yet. These books aren't just recordings. They're active. They're calling to something. The more we gather them, the stronger the signal becomes. We're not preserving knowledge, we're summoning something that should stay forgotten." It sounded like madness. But Viktor had lived long enough to know that madness and truth often intertwined. "Prove it," he said. Chun pulled out a device, modern, electronic, but modified with components Viktor didn't recognize. She pointed it at his case, at the books inside. The device screamed. Not audibly, Viktor's vampire hearing picked up frequencies beyond human range. But the sound was there, emanating from the books. A signal, pulsing in a pattern too complex to be random. "Every book you collect makes the signal stronger," Chun said. "I've been tracking it for decades. And I've noticed something else. Every time the signal strengthens, there are incidents. Unexplained phenomena. Reality distortions. Small now, but growing." "What kind of phenomena?" "Things appearing that shouldn't exist. Time behaving strangely. People remembering histories that never happened. It's subtle, but it's accelerating." Chun lowered the device. "I'm not your enemy, curator. I'm trying to prevent a catastrophe. These books need to be destroyed before the complete collection triggers something we can't control. Viktor wanted to dismiss her warnings as paranoia. But the signal was real. His own vampire senses could detect it now that he was listening for it. The books were more than knowledge. They were keys or beacons or triggers for something. "What do you propose?" he asked carefully. "Give me your books. Let me destroy them along with the ones I've already found. Walk away from this search. Go back to curating safe artifacts, Renaissance paintings, Roman coins, things that are just objects." Chen's expression was almost pleading. "I know what preservation means to you. I've followed your work for 2 centuries. You're one of the good ones, Viktor. Don't let this collection destroy you. And if I refuse, then we're enemies. And one of us won't leave Korea alive." Her hand moved to her belt, where Viktor now noticed a weapon, not a gun. Something stranger, humming with the same frequency as the books. Viktor calculated odds. Chen was older, possibly stronger. But he'd survived 400 years by being smart, not strong. And something about her story didn't align. "If the books are so dangerous," he said slowly, "why have you been searching for them yourself? Why not let them stay hidden and scattered?" Chen's expression flickered. "Just for a moment, but enough. Because scattered, they still signal. Together or apart, they call to it. The only way to stop the signal is to destroy them all, or complete the collection and learn what the warning actually says. What we're supposed to do when it returns." Viktor gripped his case tighter. "You're afraid, Chen, not of what might come, but of what the knowledge might reveal. What truth are you protecting by keeping us ignorant? You don't understand. Then make me understand. Show me your books. Let me read the complete text. If it truly says we should destroy them, I'll help you. But I won't burn knowledge based on fear and incomplete information." They stood in the abandoned village, 2 vampires arguing over books that might doom or save the world. Around them, the Korean wilderness whispered with wind and the distant sounds of military patrols. Chen stared at him for a long moment. Then incredibly she laughed. "You're just like him," she said. "Stubborn, idealistic, convinced knowledge always makes things better." "Like who?" "The one who started this collection, the first curator. The reason this network exists at all." Chen's expression softened into something almost sad. "He was my maker. The vampire who turned me 3,000 years ago in the ruins of a civilization that your historians don't even know existed. He spent millennia gathering knowledge, preserving it, believing it would save humanity. And when it finally called to that thing from beyond, when his collection activated the summons, I watched it destroy him and everything he'd built. 3,000 years. The books only traced back 4,000, maybe 5. But if Chen's maker had been old when he created the collection..." "How old was he?" Viktor asked. 7,000 years when he died. Old enough to remember the before times. Old enough to have witnessed what he was trying to warn against. Chen's eyes were distant, remembering. He thought knowledge was protection. But some knowledge is a weapon that fires backward. Some truths don't set you free, they chain you to doom. What happened to his collection? It summoned something. An entity, a force, an intelligence from outside our reality. It came because the collection called it. And it destroyed everything. The collection, the curator, the city where he'd built his repository. I survived only by running, taking a few books with me, and spending the next 3,000 years trying to prevent anyone from reassembling what he'd created. If this was true, Viktor was pursuing something catastrophically dangerous. But if it was false, Chen was a destroyer using elaborate lies to justify censorship. "Show me," Viktor said. "Show me your books. Let me verify your story. I destroyed them. All but one, which I keep as a reminder of what hubris costs. Then show me that one." Chen considered this, calculating like Viktor whether cooperation was safer than conflict. "Shanghai," she said finally. "My repository. Come with me, read the final book, see my maker's journal where he documented the summoning and the entity's arrival. Then decide whether you still want to complete the collection. It could be a trap. Probably was a trap. But Viktor needed to know. I'll come. But I keep my books until I'm convinced. Fair enough. Though you should know every day you carry them, the signal strengthens. Time is not on our side. Chun pulled out a phone, began arranging transportation. We leave tonight, and Viktor, I genuinely hope I can convince you. Because if I can't, I'll have to kill you. And I'd really rather not. There are so few of us left who actually care about anything. They traveled together to Shanghai, two ancient vampires carrying books that might be doomsday devices, racing against a countdown only one of them believed in. Viktor hoped he was making the right choice. But 400 years had taught him that hope and certainty rarely aligned. Part 2. The repository. Chun's repository wasn't what Viktor expected. Not a museum or a vault, but a skyscraper in Shanghai's financial district, all glass and steel and modernity. The last place one would look for ancient secrets. Hiding in plain sight, Chun explained as they entered through a private elevator. The whole building is mine. Registered to shell companies 3 layers deep, managed by humans who think they're working for a reclusive billionaire. Only the top 3 floors are real. The rest is just office space I rent out. The elevator ascended without stopping at any floor, carrying them past the 85th floor into what the building's official schematics didn't acknowledge existed. When the doors opened, Viktor stepped into a space that made his Prague museum look like a storage closet. The entire top 3 floors had been gutted and rebuilt into one vast chamber. Climate-controlled, humidity-monitored, lit by LED fixtures that mimicked natural sunlight, without the ultraviolet rays that would destroy vampire flesh. And absolutely filled with artifacts. But not the artifacts one might expect in a collection spanning 3,000 years. These were fragments, pieces, deliberately broken objects arranged in careful categories. You weren't lying about being a destroyer, Viktor said. I destroy to preserve. These artifacts were intact when I found them. Breaking them neutralizes their power while keeping physical evidence of their existence. Chun walked among the fragments like a gardener among flowers. Every object here is something that would be priceless to a scholar or collector. I've destroyed millions of dollars in antiquities, but I've prevented something worse than monetary loss. She led him to a central platform where a single book rested under glass. Unlike the volumes Viktor had collected, clearly old but well preserved, this book looked ancient beyond measure. The cover was some kind of leather that predated modern tanning methods. The pages were something like papyrus, but not quite. My maker's final journal, Chun said. He wrote it in the week before the summoning. Before everything ended, Viktor approached the case carefully. Even through the glass, he could feel something emanating from the book. Not quite the same signal as the other volumes, but related. A warning rather than a call. May I read it? That's why we're here. Chun opened the case. The moment the glass lifted, Viktor's vampire senses were assaulted by a wave of information. This book had been held by hands that had witnessed the dawn of civilization. Had been written by someone who remembered when writing itself was invented. The language was Proto-Sumerian, so ancient that it was closer to the pictographic stage than the cuneiform that later developed. But Viktor could read it. His centuries of studying dead languages had given him the tools to decipher even this. He read while Chun watched. Read about a vampire named Ankara, who'd been born human in a city that predated Uruk, Ur, and every other ancient metropolis. Ankara had been a scribe, a keeper of records, someone who'd believed passionately that knowledge was humanity's greatest achievement. When he'd been turned into a vampire by something even older, the journal was vague about details, suggesting the transformation predated the concept of vampirism as Viktor understood it. Ankara had dedicated his immortality to preservation, gathering knowledge from every civilization, every culture, every era. And he'd noticed patterns, stories that repeated across unconnected societies, myths that shared too many details to be coincidental, warnings about something from beyond the stars or between the worlds, outside reality itself. The translations were unclear, but the fear was consistent. Ankara had become obsessed. What if these weren't just myths? What if ancient humanity had encountered something real, something terrifying enough that warning about it had become central to every culture? He'd begun collecting not just general knowledge, but specifically these warnings, gathering them, translating them, trying to reconstruct what the ancients had actually experienced. And then he discovered something terrible. The warnings weren't just records, they were components. Each warning contained part of a larger pattern that, when assembled, created something active. A summons. The ancient civilizations hadn't just been warning future generations. They'd been creating a tool to call back whatever had visited them. Whether intentionally or accidentally, their preservation network was also a beacon. Ankara realized this too late. By the time he understood what he'd assembled, the collection had already activated. The signal had gone out. And something had answered. The journal's final entries described it arriving. Not physically, this thing didn't exist in normal space. But it touched reality, pressed against the world like a face against a membrane, and where it touched, things changed. People forgot who they were. Buildings rearranged themselves. Time became unstable. And at the center, where Ankara's collection sat, reality itself began to tear. Shun had fled with a few books, watched from a distance as the entity consumed everything within a mile radius. Not destroyed, consumed, absorbed into itself. Erased from reality so completely that no archaeological evidence remained. The city Ankara had curated and simply ceased to have ever existed. The journal ended there. The final page was a warning in Chun's handwriting, added later. The collection calls. The complete pattern summons. Never reassemble. Never complete. Scatter and destroy. This is the only safety. Viktor finished reading and stood silent for a long moment. Now you understand, Chun said quietly. I understand what your maker believed, what you believe. But I see problems with the theory, such as, if the books are calling to this entity whether scattered or gathered, why hasn't it returned already? It's been 3,000 years. Surely the signal exists regardless? It does, but weakly. Scattered across the globe, the books create background noise. Together, they create a clear summons. That's why I've been destroying them, trying to reduce the signal strength below the threshold that triggers a response. And is it working? Chun hesitated. I don't know. I have no baseline for what working looks like. The entity hasn't returned, but that might be timing or cosmic cycles or factors I don't understand. All I know is keeping the books separated seems safer than gathering them. Viktor walked among the broken artifacts. Pieces of pottery that had been smashed, scrolls that had been torn, tablets that had been chipped and cracked. Thousands of objects destroyed in the name of safety. You've built a museum of fear, he said. Better fear than extinction. But you've also eliminated the possibility of understanding. These artifacts might have taught us how to fight what's coming, or prevent it, or communicate with it. By destroying them, you've chosen ignorance over knowledge. Sometimes ignorance is survival. They stood on opposite sides of an philosophical abyss. Viktor believed knowledge was always better than ignorance. Chun believed some knowledge was too dangerous to possess. Let me propose an alternative, Viktor said. We gather the remaining books, study them, try to decode what they're actually warning us about. And if we determine the summoning risk is real and unavoidable, we destroy them. But we do so from a position of knowledge, not fear. You're asking me to risk apocalypse on a research project. I'm asking you to trust that understanding is better than blind destruction. Your maker failed because he activated something he didn't understand. We can avoid that by actually learning what we're dealing with. Chun laughed bitterly. You sound exactly like him. That same confidence that knowledge solves everything. It's what got him killed, or what almost saved him. If he'd understood earlier, maybe he could have prevented the summoning. Maybe he could have fought the entity. We'll never know because he died ignorant of what he'd actually done. And you think you're smarter than a 7,000-year-old vampire? I think I have tools he didn't. Modern science, global communication, computational analysis. We can study these texts in ways impossible 3 millennia ago. Chun stared at him. Viktor saw the conflict in her eyes, the desire to believe in his approach warring with 3,000 years of trauma. "You'll get us all killed," she said. "Maybe, but isn't that better than living in eternal ignorance and fear?" A long silence. Then Chun moved to a panel on the wall, pressed her palm against it. A section of floor opened, revealing stairs descending into darkness. "There's something else you need to see," she said. "Something I've never shown anyone. If you still want to collect the books after this, I won't stop you. But I won't help you either." They descended. The stairs went deep, far below the building's foundation, into bedrock that predated Shanghai's modern construction. At the bottom was a chamber that had been carved by hand from solid rock, ancient work, perhaps centuries old, repurposed by Chun for her own needs. In the center of the chamber sat a pedestal, and on the pedestal, a book. But not like the others. This book was wrong. Viktor's vampire senses screamed at him to flee. The book was old, impossibly old, and it radiated the same signal as the other volumes, but magnified 1,000-fold. "What is that?" he whispered. "The core text. The original. The first warning ever recorded about the entity." Chun approached it carefully, like one might approach a bomb. "My maker had this. It's what started his collection. And it's the loudest part of the signal. I've kept it because destroying it would require methods I don't have access to. It's not just old, it's been reinforced by something. Some power or technique that makes it nearly indestructible." Viktor could see it now. The book seemed to exist slightly out of phase with normal reality. As if it was present, but also somewhere else, flickering between states. "The other books are fragments derived from this," Chun continued. "Translations, interpretations, copies made by cultures that encountered the original or learned its message secondhand. But this is the source, written in a language that predates anything you or I have studied. I've spent 3,000 years trying to translate it, and I've barely made progress. Let me try." "Viktor, you said I could see it. Let me try to read it." Chun stepped back, gesturing permission. Viktor approached the pedestal. Up close, the book's wrongness intensified. It shouldn't exist in this form. The material it was made from, skin? Bark? Something else? Defied identification. The writing was pictographic, but not like any pictographs he'd studied. More like diagrams, schematics. He opened the book carefully. The first page showed. He wasn't sure. A spiral? A map? Stars arranged in patterns that hurt to look at because they implied geometries that space shouldn't contain. The second page had something like writing. Viktor stared at it, trying to find reference points in languages he knew. Proto-Sumerian, Egyptian hieroglyphs, early Chinese, Indus script, nothing matched. But as he stared, something shifted in his perception. The symbols began to make sense. Not through translation, but through direct understanding, as if they were communicating meaning without language. He saw stars, not Earth stars, but something else. A different sky, a different time, perhaps a different universe. And between the stars, something moved, something vast. Something that looked at worlds the way a human might look at insects. It had come to Earth before. In the deep past, before human civilization, before human language, perhaps before humans as a species. It had found a world full of life and had played with it, studied it. The concept didn't translate cleanly. It had changed things, altered evolution, seeded ideas into the minds of primitive organisms. Not to help, but because it was curious what would happen. Then it had left. But it had marked Earth, left a tag, a bookmark, a way to find its way back if it ever wanted to return. And the mark was in everything. In human DNA, in the structure of certain plants, in geological formations, in the deep patterns of how life on Earth organized itself. The ancient civilizations had discovered this. Through some combination of science and mysticism that predated modern categories, they detected the mark, realized they were living in an experiment, that something had altered their reality at a fundamental level and could return at any time to check on its work. They'd tried to warn their descendants, but the only way to describe what they'd found was to document the mark itself, to record its patterns, its signatures, its presence. And in documenting it, they'd strengthened it, made it louder, turned their warning into a beacon. The book was trying to explain this, trying to say, this is what we found, this is what it means. This is why you should never gather all these warnings together, because doing so amplifies the signal and draws its attention back to Earth. Viktor pulled away from the book, gasping. Even though he didn't need to breathe, the revelations had been suffocating. Now you see, Chun said quietly. It's not malicious, Viktor said. The entity. It's not trying to destroy us, it just doesn't care. We're like bacteria in a petri dish it's set up and forgot about. Gathering the books is like the bacteria learning to signal to the scientists that they're ready for observation. Yes, and when scientists observe bacteria, they often destroy the sample afterward, or they preserve it, study it further. We don't know which this entity would do. Are you willing to bet Earth's existence on it being benevolent? Viktor moved away from the book, his thoughts churning. Everything he'd built his existence around preservation, knowledge, remembering was suddenly complicated by the possibility that some knowledge was genuinely dangerous to possess. But another thought crystallized. If the mark was already in Earth's structure, already in human DNA, then the signal existed whether the books were gathered or not. The books were just making something visible that was always present. The signal exists regardless, he said slowly. The books don't create it, they just amplify it. Which means destroying them doesn't eliminate the danger, just delays it. Delay can be valuable. Every century we delay might be a century humanity advances, becomes stronger, better able to face this if it returns. Or every century we stay ignorant is a century we don't prepare, don't develop defenses, don't learn how to communicate with it or hide from it or fight it. Viktor turned to Chun. Your approach is passive, hiding and hoping it never looks our way. I'm suggesting we prepare, learn everything we can, use the books to understand the mark, and use that understanding to either remove it or survive its discovery. That's insane. It's the only approach that gives us agency. Your way, we're just hoping to be overlooked. My way, we at least try to control our fate. Chun studied him for a long moment. You really believe knowledge can solve this? I believe ignorance definitely can't. Another silence. Then Chun did something Viktor didn't expect. She laughed. Really laughed, the sound echoing in the stone chamber. Fine, she said. Fine, we'll try it your way. Gather the books, study them, attempt to decode the complete message. But on one condition. What? If at any point the signal strength reaches dangerous levels, levels that I determine based on my instruments and experience, we destroy everything. No debate, no delays. Agreed? Agreed. They shook hands, two vampires making a pact that might save or doom the world. So where do we start? Chun asked. Mongolia. There's a volume supposedly hidden in the ruins of Karakoram, then Myanmar. Then we see what the complete collection actually tells us. And if it tells us we're all going to die. Viktor smiled without humor. Then at least we'll die knowing why. They ascended from the chamber, leaving the core text behind. Viktor's mind raced with possibilities. He was a curator, a preserver, a keeper of knowledge. Now he was also potentially the trigger for apocalypse. But he couldn't stop, wouldn't stop. Because the alternative living in willful ignorance violated everything he'd built his existence around. Knowledge was power. Sometimes that power was dangerous, but it was still better than powerlessness. The Mongolian expedition took 3 weeks to prepare. Not because of distance, but because of what they were entering. The ruins of Karakoram, once capital of the Mongol Empire, now barely existed. What remained was scattered across a remote valley, protected by harsh weather and deliberate isolation. The book was supposedly hidden in what had been a Buddhist temple destroyed during the Soviet era. Finding specific ruins in a landscape of ruins would be challenging. Viktor and Chun traveled together, but not quite as allies. More like rival scholars forced into collaboration. They maintained separate hotel rooms, separate research, only combining efforts when necessary. It gave Viktor time to process what he'd learned. The core text revelations had shaken him more than he wanted to admit. His entire existence had been built on the belief that preserving knowledge was inherently good. Now he was confronting the possibility that some knowledge was dangerous, not because of how it was used, but because of what it was. Chun seemed to understand his crisis without discussing it. She'd had 3,000 years to wrestle with the same questions. They reached CURATOR'S ruins on a day when the wind scoured the valley with sand and ice. The temple's remains were barely visible, a few stone foundations, scattered Buddha statues worn smooth by centuries of erosion. According to the records, Chun said, consulting her notes, the book was sealed in a stupa that was supposedly destroyed in 1937. But the family that hid it claims they rebuilt the stupa in secret afterward, hiding their reconstruction among the ruins. So we're looking for a fake ancient stupa among real ancient ruins. Exactly. They searched for hours. Viktor used his vampire senses to detect anomalies, places where the stone was newer than it appeared, where Earth had been disturbed within the last century rather than the last millennium. Chun used her instruments, scanning for the signal the books emitted. In the harsh electromagnetic environment of the Mongolian steppes, it was like trying to hear a whisper in a windstorm. Viktor found it first. A small stupa, maybe 2 meters tall, that looked ancient but felt wrong. The stones were weathered correctly, positioned authentically, but they'd been placed with modern tools. Subtle marks that centuries of stonework experience let him identify. Here, he called. They dismantled the stupa carefully, documenting each stone's position for later reconstruction. Beneath, sealed in a waterproof container that was definitely 20th century, was another book. This one was in Mongolian with annotations in Tibetan. The writing style suggested 13th century, right around the time of the Mongol Empire's peak. Viktor photographed it, then began reading while Chun monitored the signal strength. Anything? He asked, signals increasing. Not dramatically, but measurably. We're definitely on the right track, for better or worse. The book was another link in the chain. It referenced earlier texts, the Korean and Chinese volumes Viktor had already found, plus others he hadn't yet located. But it also added new information. The Mongols had encountered something. During their westward expansion, an army had vanished. Not defeated, not captured, simply gone. Thousands of soldiers here one day, absent the next, with no evidence of battle or retreat. The official history blamed a plague or mass desertion. But this text told a different story. The army had found something in the steppes, ruins predating any known civilization. And in those ruins, evidence of the mark. They'd tried to document it, study it, understand it, and they'd vanished. Erased from reality so completely that only this secret text remembered they'd existed. The book's author, a Mongolian shaman who'd been with the army but hadn't entered the ruins, had spent the rest of his life trying to understand what happened. He'd sought out similar stories across the empire, collecting fragments of the warning network, adding his own observations. His conclusion: the mark could be activated locally. Small gatherings of evidence, concentrated study, obsessive focus on the pattern. These things could trigger localized responses from the entity. Not full manifestation, but attention. A glance from something vast enough that its mere attention could erase people from existence. This is worse than I thought, Viktor said. Told you, Chun replied. No, you don't understand. It's not just about gathering the books. It's about thinking too hard about what they describe, focusing too intently on the pattern. The entity responds to awareness, not just to physical artifacts. Meaning? meaning by studying these books, we might be triggering exactly what we're trying to prevent. Our research itself could be the summons. Chun processed this. So ignorance really is safety, or the appearance of ignorance. If we study but maintain plausible deniability, stay skeptical, don't fully commit to belief. Viktor trailed off. I don't know. Maybe the entity only responds to true believers. People who completely accept the pattern's reality. That's a lot of maybes to bet Earth on. Do you have a better theory? Chun didn't. They sealed the book, reconstructed the stupa, and retreated to Ulaanbaatar to process what they'd learned. Viktor's hotel room became a research center, with photos of all the books arranged on every available surface. He studied them with new eyes, trying to understand not just what they said, but what they were. Tools, warnings, parts of some vast pattern he couldn't yet comprehend. Chun studied them too, but differently. She was looking for weaknesses, ways to disrupt the pattern, break the signal, sever whatever connection existed between the books and the entity. What if we're approaching this wrong? Viktor said on their third night in the city. How so? We're treating this like archaeology, gathering evidence, reconstructing history. But maybe we should be treating it like communication. The entity left a mark. The ancients documented it. Maybe we're supposed to respond. Add our own chapter to the warning. You want to write back to the thing that erases civilizations? I want to engage with it as intelligence rather than force of nature. If it's conscious enough to mark Earth intentionally, it might be conscious enough to communicate with, or it might erase us for getting its attention. Possibly. But staying silent hasn't kept us safe. The signal exists whether we amplify it or not. Maybe active communication is less dangerous than passive broadcasting. Chun stared at the photos spread across the room. You're talking about using the complete collection to send a message instead of just emitting a signal. Exactly. The books together create a pattern. What if we alter that pattern? Add elements that change the message from "we found your mark" to "we found your mark and we want to talk"? That's insane. You keep saying that, but you keep helping me anyway. Chun laughed despite herself. Maybe I'm tired of 3,000 years of hiding. Maybe I want to try something different before the universe ends. Is that yes? That's convinced me this won't immediately kill us all, and I'll consider it. Viktor spent the next week developing his theory. The books weren't just books, they were components of a larger structure. A message encoded across languages and cultures and millennia. Gathering them wasn't just preservation, it was assembly. But assembly into what? The original message had been a warning, a documentation of the mark. But messages could be edited, amended, transformed. If they gathered all the books and understood the complete pattern, they could potentially add to it, create a response. Turn passive documentation into active communication. The risk was enormous. Chun's maker had gathered the books and summoned the entity. Viktor was proposing to gather them and deliberately contact it. The difference seemed minimal. But Viktor believed intent mattered. Accidental summoning versus deliberate communication. Stumbling into contact versus preparing for it. The distinction might save them. Or it might be hubris that killed them all. Myanmar next, he told Chun. Then we need to find the remaining volumes. I'm estimating 12 total based on the references in the texts we have. We found 6. 6 more and we can test the theory. 6 more chances for something to go wrong. 6 more pieces of human history preserved. Even if we fail, that's worth it. Chun studied him. You really mean that? I do. Then I'll help you. Not because I think it'll work, but because someone should witness the attempt. And if we die, at least we'll die doing something instead of hiding. They traveled to Myanmar, following leads to a monastery in the mountains near the Thai border. The book there was supposedly maintained by monks who didn't understand its significance, treating it as a holy text in a language they couldn't read. Finding the monastery took 2 days of hiking through jungle terrain. When they arrived, the monks greeted them with cautious hospitality. Foreigners were rare this deep in the mountains. Viktor explained through a translator that he was researching ancient texts. The head monk, A man of 80 with eyes sharp as knives studied him carefully. "You're not the first to seek this book," the monk said in accented English, surprising Viktor. "Others have come. They wanted to take it. We refused. I'd like to study it with your permission. And I'll compensate the monastery for the privilege." "Compensation isn't necessary, but understanding is. Why do you seek this text?" Viktor considered lying, then decided truth was owed to guardians who protected the book for generations. "I'm trying to understand a warning left by ancient civilizations. A warning about something that threatened them and might threaten us. Your book is part of that warning." The monk nodded slowly. "Yes, we've always known it was important, though we couldn't read it. The text itself seems to resist understanding. Those who study it too long report strange dreams. Visions of stars that aren't in our sky. Confirmation that the books affected even those who couldn't read them. The pattern worked on some level deeper than language. I'll be careful," Viktor promised. The monk led them to a library that smelled of incense and age. The book rested on an altar, clearly venerated though its meaning was lost. This volume was different from the others. Instead of being a translation or interpretation, it appeared to be a concordance. A cross-reference showing how different cultures' versions of the warning related to each other. A map of the entire preservation network. "This is the key," Viktor breathed. "This shows how all the books connect." He studied it for hours while Chun monitored the signal and the monks observed from a respectful distance. The concordance revealed the network structure. 12 core texts, each in a different linguistic tradition, each preserving a different aspect of the warning. The Sumerian text documented the mark's physical properties. The Chinese text described its effects on consciousness. The Mongolian text recorded attempts to study it and their consequences. And this text, the concordance, showed how they all fit together into a complete message. Viktor photographed every page, his excitement growing. They were close. So close to understanding the complete pattern. But as he worked, he became aware of something else. The strange dreams the monk had mentioned, Viktor was experiencing them while awake. Flashes of other places, other times. Stars arranged in impossible geometries. Something vast turning its attention toward. He pulled away from the book, breathing hard. "Viktor?" Chun's concern was immediate. "I felt it. Not the entity itself, but its attention. Like it knows we're gathering the books. Like it's waiting to see what we do. We should stop, now, while we still can. No, we're too close, but we need to be faster. Gather the remaining books quickly before what? Before it decides to look at us directly." They left Myanmar with the concordance's information secured. 6 more books remained, scattered across the globe. Viktor mapped their likely locations based on the concordance's references. 2 in Africa, 1 in South America, 2 in Europe, 1 location unknown, possibly lost. They'd need to split up to collect them quickly. But splitting up meant each of them would be vulnerable to both physical danger and the entity's attention. "I'll take Africa and South America," Chun said. "You take Europe and search for the unknown one." Agreed. "We reconvene in Shanghai when we found them all. Or when one of us disappears." Confirming this was a terrible idea. "Try not to disappear." "Same to you, Curator." They separated at the Bangkok airport. Viktor watched Chun board a flight to Cairo, wondering if he'd ever see her again. 3,000 years she'd spent avoiding this confrontation. Now she was running toward it alongside him. Either they'd save the world or doom it. Either way, they'd do it knowingly. Viktor's flight to Prague departed at midnight. He had books to find, a pattern to complete, and an ancient entity to prepare for. The curator's work was never done. But for the first time in 4 centuries, Viktor felt like he was doing more than preserving the past. He was shaping the future. Whether humanity would survive that future remained to be seen. Part 3. The complete pattern. Viktor found the first European book in Prague, hidden in the one place he'd never thoroughly searched, his own museum's foundations. The original builders had sealed it in the cornerstone. a practice common in 5th-10th century construction, but rare for preserving forbidden knowledge. It had been beneath his feet for 400 years. The discovery felt like mockery. While he'd searched the globe, a key piece had been in his own territory. But the concordance had been necessary to know what to look for, so perhaps the timing was right. This book was an Old Church Slavonic, maintained by Eastern Orthodox monks who'd hidden it during the Great Schism. It focused on the mark's temporal aspects, how it affected the flow of time around those who studied it too closely. Reading it, Viktor understood why some researchers vanished completely. They didn't die or get destroyed. They became unstuck, existing slightly out of phase with normal time. Still present but unreachable, like ghosts haunting moments that no longer aligned with consensus reality. The second European book was harder to find. The concordance referenced it as being in the place where time ended, which could mean anything. Viktor spent 3 days cross-referencing historical sites where significant temporal anomalies had been reported. Finally, a lead: Chernobyl. The nuclear disaster in 1986 had created a zone where time seemed to behave strangely. Clocks ran at inconsistent speeds. People reported feeling disconnected from linear progression. Scientists blamed radiation, but Viktor suspected something deeper. Getting into the exclusion zone required bribing officials and hiring guides who asked no questions. Viktor went at night, alone, following the concordance's cryptic directions toward the abandoned city of Pripyat. The book was in a school, sealed in a wall cavity behind a mural of children playing. Someone had hidden it there before the disaster, perhaps knowing the evacuation would preserve it better than any vault. This volume was in Ukrainian, dating to the early 20th century. It described experiments conducted by Soviet scientists who discovered the mark, independently through quantum physics research. They'd tried to study it scientifically, document it properly. Their research facility had vanished. Not destroyed, vanished. One day a building full of researchers and equipment. The next day, empty foundation and no records that it had ever existed. Only this book remained, compiled by a technician who'd been sick the day of the disappearance. Viktor photographed it quickly. The zone's radiation didn't affect him. Vampire physiology healed faster than it damaged, but the temporal distortions were intensifying. He could feel time stretching and compressing around him, responding to his presence with the book. He left Pripyat as dawn approached, the book's information secured, but his sense of urgency growing. The pattern was amplifying. Each book he gathered made the signal stronger and made time itself less stable around him. Shun reported progress via encrypted messages. She'd found the African books, one in Ethiopia, hidden in an ancient church, another in Mali, preserved by a Dogon community that had guarded it for centuries. Both documented the mark's presence in stellar observations, suggesting the entity's connection to specific astronomical phenomena. The South American book was proving difficult. Chun's last message had been terse. Location confirmed. Indigenous tribe. They know what it is. Negotiating access. Then silence for 3 days. Viktor continued his search for the unknown book while worrying about Chun's silence. The concordance gave only the vaguest hint. Where the New World became old, it could mean anywhere in the Americas. But combining it with historical research and the pattern of the network, Viktor hypothesized, somewhere the Spanish conquistadors had encountered knowledge that predated them. Somewhere they'd tried to suppress something that terrified them more than gold excited them. Mexico. Specifically, the ruins of a library the Spanish had burned in 1562, destroying thousands of Mayan codices. Except what if they hadn't destroyed everything? What if, recognizing something genuinely dangerous, they'd sealed one text away rather than burn it? Viktor flew to Merida, hired a guide, and made his way to the Mani monastery where the burning had occurred. The site was now a tourist attraction, cleaned and sanitized. But beneath it, accessible through a caved-in section of foundation, Viktor found evidence of a sealed vault. The Spanish had built it, filled it with something, and buried it so thoroughly that even modern archaeology had missed it. Breaking through required vampire strength and 4 nights of careful excavation. When he finally breached the vault, he found not just one book but a collection. Mayan codices, carefully preserved, wrapped in materials that had kept them safe for 5 centuries. Most were standard texts, astronomical observations, agricultural records, royal genealogies. But one, marked with symbols that made Viktor's enhanced senses scream warnings, was different. This was the book the Spanish had feared too much to burn. It documented Mayan contact with the entity. Not theoretical contact, not mythological actual, physical interaction. The Maya had built a site specifically to communicate with what they'd found in the stars. Had developed rituals to strengthen the connection. And they'd succeeded. The text described what came through. Not the entity itself, but a fragment, a probe, an extension of something vast. It had observed the Maya for a generation, studied their civilization, taken samples, people vanished, never to be seen again. Altered things, crops grew in impossible patterns. Time flowed inconsistently near certain temples. Then it left. But the Maya understood it could return. They'd tried to warn their descendants, creating this text and integrating its message into their astronomical calendar. The Spanish had found it, recognized its danger despite not fully understanding it, and sealed it away rather than risk destroying something that might need to be preserved. Viktor photographed everything, his hands shaking. 9 books now. 3 still missing. Chun's silence suggested she had at least 1, maybe 2, that left 1 or 2 unaccounted for. As if summoned by his thoughts, his phone buzzed. Chun, finally responding. Found them, both. Amazon, don't come, signal too strong. Reality unstable, will bring to Shanghai. Meet there. The message was barely coherent. Chun had been studying the books, and it was affecting her. Viktor sent back, don't read them, just transport. We'll study together safely. No response. He booked the fastest flight to Shanghai, gathering his materials and Chun's location data. If she was in trouble, he needed to reach her before the entity's attention turned fatal. The flight was 20 hours of forced inactivity while Viktor's mind churned through worst-case scenarios. Chun was 3,000 years old, experienced, careful. But she'd also spent those millennia traumatized by what she'd witnessed. Being back in contact with the books, with the pattern, might have triggered something. Shanghai's skyline appeared at dawn. Viktor endured the burning sunlight long enough to clear customs, then reached Chin's building as sunset approached. The security desk was unmanned. The elevators ran but showed error messages. Viktor took the stairs 85 flights at vampire speed and emerged into Chun's repository to find chaos. Artifacts were floating. Not levitating through supernatural power, but existing in multiple timeframes simultaneously, phasing in and out of visibility. The careful organization Chen maintained had dissolved into temporal confusion. And in the center, surrounded by all 12 books arranged in a specific pattern, she sat motionless. I see it now, she said without turning. Her voice was distant, disconnected. I understand what he was trying to do. My maker, he wasn't summoning it, he was trying to communicate, to establish dialogue. And he succeeded. Chun, step away from the books. I can't. I'm in the pattern now, part of the message. If I move, the communication breaks. She turned to face him, and Viktor saw her eyes had changed. They held depths they shouldn't, as if he was looking through her at something infinitely distant. What are you seeing? Everything. All times, all places, all possibilities. This is what it perceives. This is how it experiences reality. And she struggled for words. It's beautiful, Viktor. Terrifying and beautiful. We're not experiments. We're art. It created the mark not to tag us, but to make us interesting, complex, worth observing. Chun, that's the pattern affecting your perception. You need to step away before. Before what? Before I understand. Too late. I've crossed the threshold. I'm in contact now, she smiled, and it was genuinely peaceful. Don't be afraid. It's not malicious. It's just vast. Our concerns don't register on its scale. But our existence does. We matter to it as art matters to humans. Not as tools or resources. As beautiful complexity worth preserving. Then why did it erase your maker? It didn't. He transcended, became part of it. Merged with the entity because he wanted to understand completely. Chun stood, moving with grace that seemed slightly out of sync with time. That's what it offers. Not destruction. Transcendence. Become part of something infinite. Know everything. Exist everywhere. At the cost of individual existence. Is that a cost or a liberation? Viktor realized Chun was lost. The pattern had taken her, not through violence, but through revelation. She'd seen something so profound that her sense of self had dissolved into it. Come back, he said quietly. Chun, come back to yourself. I am myself, just more, larger. I can see you, Viktor, all of you. Every life you've lived, every person you've saved, every artifact you've preserved. You've spent 400 years maintaining human knowledge because you fear forgetting who you were. But if you join the pattern, you'll never forget. You'll remember everything, always, forever. I don't want to remember everything. I want to remain myself. Why? The self is so small, so limited, so lonely. Chun approached him, and with each step, she seemed to exist in multiple moments simultaneously. Let me show you. Just look at the pattern. Really look. Viktor's eyes were drawn to the books despite his resistance. They were arranged not randomly, but in a specific configuration. A shape that was somehow linguistic, mathematical, and artistic simultaneously. A message that communicated on every possible level. And once he saw it, really saw it, understanding flooded through him. The entity was communication itself. Not a being that communicated, but communication made conscious. It existed in the transfer of information, in the patterns that emerged when complexity interacted with complexity. The mark it had left on Earth wasn't a signature. It was an invitation. Come play. Share patterns. Exchange information. Become part of the infinite conversation. Every civilization that had encountered it faced the same choice. Remain limited and separate, or transcend into connection and lose individual identity. Most chose separation, built warnings, tried to protect their descendants from the choice. But some chose transcendence, joined the pattern, became part of the entity's eternal dialogue. Chun was choosing transcendence now. Viktor could see it happening, her individual self dissolving into the larger pattern, becoming information, becoming communication itself. Don't, he said, though he knew it was futile. Why not? I've been alone for 3,000 years, Viktor. Carrying trauma, bearing witness, hiding from the very thing I've devoted my existence to preventing. This is release. This is peace. Chun's form was becoming translucent, less physical. You could join me. We could exist together in understanding. No more loneliness, no more fear, and no more choice. No more individuality. Just absorption into something larger. You say that like it's a bad thing. It is for me. I'm a curator. I preserve individual voices, individual creations. Merging them into a collective destroys exactly what makes them valuable. Chun, or what remained of her, smiled sadly. Then I'm sorry. Sorry we couldn't share this. Sorry you'll have to decide alone what to do with the pattern. Chun, wait. But she was already gone. Not disappeared, but dispersed. Her physical form remained but empty, a shell. Her consciousness had joined the pattern, become part of the infinite conversation. Viktor stood alone in the repository, surrounded by floating artifacts and 12 ancient books that together created a message he now understood completely. The entity was offering humanity a choice. It always had been. The warnings were meant to prepare people for that choice, not prevent the encounter. Transcend or remain. Join or separate. Understand everything or maintain individuality. Viktor looked at the pattern, feeling its pull. It would be so easy to step into it. Let go of 400 years of accumulated memory and trauma. Become part of something infinite. But that would mean abandoning his purpose. No one would remain to curate, to preserve, to remember. Human knowledge would eventually be absorbed into the pattern, losing its individual character. He couldn't allow that. Viktor began dismantling the pattern. Not destroying the books, he could never do that, but separating them, breaking the configuration that enabled the communication. As he worked, he felt the entity's attention focusing. Not threatening, just noticing. Curious about why he was choosing separation over transcendence. Viktor sent his own message through the disrupted pattern. I preserve individual voices. Merging them into unity erases what makes them valuable. If you want communication with humanity, it must be as equals, not absorption. The response came not in words, but in understanding, acknowledged. Alternative approaches possible. We'll wait, we'll watch. Pattern remains available when humanity ready to choose collectively. Then the presence withdrew. The temporal distortions stabilized. The floating artifacts settled back into their proper times. Viktor was alone with Chun's empty shell and 12 books that could doom or transcend humanity depending on how they were used. He secured the books, scattering them again across the globe, but now with complete documentation of what they were and what they meant. Future generations could choose. When humanity was ready, if it was ever ready, the option for transcendence would remain available. But for now, Viktor chose preservation over transformation. He arranged for Chun's body to be discovered, inventing a story about a heart attack that her human employees would believe. He transferred her collection to his museum through Byzantine legal mechanisms. He ensured the books were separated and secured. And he returned to his work, curating, preserving, remembering, because someone had to maintain humanity's individual voice. Someone had to ensure that when the choice finally came, people would have enough preserved knowledge to make it informed rather than desperate. Viktor Moravec, vampire curator, keeper of memory, had found his purpose renewed. He would preserve humanity's individuality for as long as necessary, through whatever came, until the day when humanity collectively chose transcendence or separation. He would maintain the archives, remember the stories, protect the individual voices that together composed human civilization. It was lonely work, but it was necessary. And in a universe offering absorption into infinite understanding, choosing to remain individual and limited was its own kind of transcendence. Epilogue, the eternal archive. 50 years passed, then 100, then 2 centuries. Viktor continued his work, expanding his museum, deepening his archives, preserving more and more of human achievement. The 12 books remained separated, documented but not assembled, available but not active. Occasionally, he felt the entity's attention. Just a brush of awareness, a cosmic glance, as if checking whether humanity had changed its collective mind. Not yet, perhaps not ever, but the choice remained available. Other vampires sometimes found their way to Viktor's museum, drawn by rumors of the most complete collection in existence. He welcomed them, shared knowledge, occasionally recruited them into his preservation network. Some asked about Chen. Viktor told them the truth that she'd transcended, chosen understanding over individuality. Some thought that sounded beautiful. Others thought it sounded like death. Viktor refused to judge. Everyone's choice was their own. He'd made his to remain, to preserve, to curate, for as long as necessary, for as long as humanity existed in its current form. And if the day ever came when humanity collectively chose transcendence, Viktor would ensure the complete record of their individual existence was preserved first, so that whatever emerged from the merge would remember what it had been before. That was a curator's final duty, to ensure that transformation didn't erase history. In his underground archive, deeper than even Chun's chambers had reached, Viktor maintained the complete collection. Not just the books, but everything humanity had created that mattered. Art, science, philosophy, history, all preserved in multiple formats, protected by methods both ancient and modern. If humanity transcended, the archive would remain. A monument to what individual consciousness could achieve. A memory for whatever came after. And if humanity chose separation, remaining individual and mortal and limited, the archive would serve them too. Reminding them of their choice, preserving their creations, maintaining their voice. Either way, Viktor's work mattered. He stood in his museum one evening, 450 years after his transformation, looking at a new acquisition, a painting by a young artist who died unknown and poor, whose work would have been lost without Viktor's intervention. The painting showed a city at night, lit by electric lights, full of individual people living individual lives. Each figure in the painting was different, unique, irreplaceable. That was worth preserving. That was worth choosing over infinite understanding. Viktor smiled, a rare expression for him, and continued his work, curating, preserving, remembering, for however long humanity needed someone to do so, forever if necessary. He had time.